Years ago, I was on a cross-country road trip solo to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but the weather ended up being horrible and it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me. I was stuck in traffic for a while and I ended up being 5 hours behind schedule. At this point, I was exhausted and in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off of some back roads. It was obviously small and dirty, but it would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where the check-in was. The guy that worked there eyeballed me. Back then, I was a young girl attending college. He then asked me if I was traveling alone. When I went to hand him my ID and credit card, he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I managed to gather just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty and barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom. Then I flipped the mattress, as there were signs of bed bugs, and a moment later, I spied a roach. That was it. I was out. I decided to use the parking space instead and sleep in the back hatch of my SUV. I curled up using a suitcase for a pillow and some random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for about an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside. I glanced out to see the guy from the check-in standing outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call and walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing, with another guy. I hadn't seen two guys enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered in the back seat, but between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the parking lot, talking more, one of them gesturing across the street to where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up the SUV. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but I didn't want my family to worry, so I said nothing to them when I arrived. When I got back home about 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had been closed down only days before I called. When I was younger, each and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning, around 2 a.m. We crossed into Mexico, and this is where things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside of our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of cacti. We had been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive. I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was going on around me, because I really don't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. "Lots of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city." And he left it at that. Despite his reassurance, my mom kept a weary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves by watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that was blocking the rear window. We got tired of that pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we all turned to watch the car inch closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car. On a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with a few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much, My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that Mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Miguel, pull over right now in front of the police." And he did. The car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park the car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us and taunted us. The policeman took her claims very seriously and told us how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. He then offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved, until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw the car that had followed us pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. I was on a cross-country road trip with a colleague. We were driving through West Texas on a major highway. In the area we were in, even the major highway was pretty desolate. There had been a truck stop or gas station about every 100 miles, and every one of them was solitary with no other buildings in sight. There weren't really any towns. The exits were places to get more gas to get to the next gas station. And my colleague had been driving for about 4 hours. I can usually drive about 8 before I get tired. I go on frequent road trips, but she could only manage about 4 or 5 before it was my turn again. We were also getting low on gas, at about a quarter tank, and you learn from road travel to fill up when you get the chance. So she was looking for a gas station as we drove along. It's really corny, but we were talking about fate and destiny, and how the weird did at the time. That kind of conversation gets me keyed up and worried, so I was trying to change the subject. She took an exit while we were talking, and I got out my coffee mug so I could fill it up, as it was my turn to drive. We pulled into a typical Nowhereville gas station. It had a trailer out back. I assumed, thinking back, it was probably where the people who owned it lived. There was another car parked in front of the doors off to one side. We got out, still talking, and walked up to the double doors, each of us grabbing a door handle. The doors were locked. I turned and looked around to see if there was a sign. Sometimes places will put up, "back in 5 minutes," and I noticed several things in succession. The coffee pot inside was halfway done, brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The monitors that showed the store were visible from the outside, where we were, but all of them were showing static. There was a splash of bright red on the door in the back of the place, which was closed. I suddenly realized that I was looking at a huge streak of blood with handprints in it. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. My friend began shaking the door and yelling, "We need to get gas." But I had already turned and walked away from the doors. I then said, "We have to leave now." I grabbed her by the arm and started propelling her back to the car. Now I noticed the other car in the lot had no plates. It was dingy and had dents. There was an empty gun rack in the window of it. I ran to the car, dragging her with me. She seemed to take forever to open the doors. The whole time she kept saying, "But we need gas." Well, I tried to explain to her, "There's blood in there. Blood." After what seemed like a year, she pulled the car out. When we were backing up, I saw through the windows that the back door to the gas station was opening. But we had pulled away before anyone came out, thankfully. I was freaking out until we were about 20 miles down the highway. I tried to call the police, but I had no signal, and I didn't get one until we had driven about 40 miles and got to a truck stop. I called the cops. They thanked me, and I never heard anything more about it. To this day, I feel like if I hadn't have freaked out, we might have met the robber, or whoever was in the back room of that place. I also wish I would have been able to find out what the hell happened there. It was a Chevron station. somewhere in the western part of Texas.
Last year, I was traveling back from college to go home. My college was about a 10-hour drive, and I had initially planned to drive through the night, but at about 2 in the morning, I was overcome with sleepiness, and knowing I still had about 4 hours to drive, I decided I needed to stop. I saw a sign for a rest stop, and I pulled off. The rest stop was fairly quiet, and I parked in the corner. I extended my seat back and closed my eyes. I was so tired that I fell right asleep. Sometime later, though, I woke up. I looked out my windshield to see it was still dark out. Then I turned my head to my driver's side window to see a man standing at the window, looking in. He had a beard, and as soon as he saw me looking at him, he started to smile. I freaked out and started scrambling to find my keys. He then tried opening my door. It was locked, of course, and then the man began knocking at the window. I found my keys that were in the cup holder and started my car as fast as I could. I pulled out of there and drove all the way home. I arrived home safely at 7 a.m. I never plan on sleeping at a rest stop again. A couple years ago, my wife and I were doing a cross-country road trip. We were heading west, and somewhere along the way, we stopped for the night at a rest stop. We didn't mind sleeping in our car, and we wanted to save money on hotels. This rest stop had a little building with bathrooms and some vending machines in it. At about 11:30 p.m., I went in it to brush my teeth. It had a pretty decent-sized bathroom, and it looked well taken care of. There was about 5 stalls and 5 sinks as well, and it had good lighting. I got out my toothbrush and started brushing. I noticed that someone was in the far stall on the end because I saw feet on the floor, but other than that, there was no one else in there. When I finished brushing my teeth, I left the bathroom and started walking back down the hall of the rest stop when I heard a stall door slam shut very loudly from the bathroom. Then it happened again and again. There was a stall door being repeatedly opened and shut. The man that was in there must have been slamming it over and over again. It kind of creeped me out, and I walked faster to get back to our car. Once I got back to the car, I was very tired and we went right to sleep. I woke up in the night and I really had to pee. I got out of our car quietly so I didn't wake up my wife. When I got out, I looked at my phone to see that it was 2:42 a.m. I walked back into the rest stop and into the bathroom. As soon as I stepped in, I remembered the man and I saw someone was in the far stall again. The shoes appeared to be the same as the man's before. The bathroom only had stalls, so I went in the closest one to the door. As soon as I shut the stall, I heard the one on the far end open. I heard the man walk from the end and then stop directly in front of my stall. I turned around to see through the crack that he was looking right at me. He then tried opening it. I said, "What do you want?" in a nervous voice. There was no answer. I had to think quickly of how I could get out of there. The man seemed to be insane. I stuck my foot under the side of the stall as if I was going to go under the stalls to the one next to me. The man moved a little to his left. At that moment, I pushed the stall open as fast as I could and into the man, pushing him back. I took off and sprinted to the door and ran out of the bathroom. He began chasing after me, and I could hear him about 10 feet behind me. I didn't bother to look back at all. I just ran as fast as I could. I ran all the way to my car, jumped inside, and locked the doors literally 2 or 3 seconds before the man got to the car and started trying the doors before he started banging on my window. My wife woke up and started freaking out. She was very confused. I didn't have time to explain. I started the engine and drove off faster than I ever have before in my life. As I drove away, I saw the man just stand there and stare at me. My wife was in shock, and I tried to explain everything to her. Eventually, we stopped at another rest stop about 20 miles down the road to sleep the rest of the night. But after that, we haven't been to a rest stop since. Every year, a couple of friends and I take a road trip out west. Last time, we were about halfway through the trip when we decided to stop at a rest stop in Colorado. It was about 11 p.m. We weren't going to spend the night there, but we just needed to stop to use the restroom and stretch our legs. The rest stop was very unique. It was rather large and near some mountains. However, not very many people were there. In fact, I didn't see any other cars in the parking lot at all. My friends went in to use the bathrooms. I stayed back to check the oil on the car, and once they got back, I went in. The rest stop had several displays of local attractions and things like that, as well as the typical bathrooms and vending machines. As I went in the bathroom, I heard someone walk in the rest stop and walk towards the bathroom, but nobody went in. It sounded like they were just standing outside. Once I left the bathroom, nobody was there. I heard footsteps walking around the corner, but once I got around the corner, no one was there. Then I heard them from back near the bathrooms where I just was. This confused me a lot, and I walked back around the corner to see nobody was there again. I guess maybe my friends were somehow pulling a prank on me. I started to walk back, and then I heard someone shaking the vending machine near the door. Now I knew it had to be my friends, and I walked over to see the vending machines, and of course, nobody was there. I just shook my head and walked back out to the car to see all my friends inside waiting for me. I asked them if they were inside at all, but they all told me no. I suddenly got the creeps and said we should get out of there. We drove away and got to our hotel. I still don't know who or what was making those noises. Last year, my parents and I drove to New York. I was 14 at the time. On the last day before arriving, we were in upstate New York and stopped at a rest stop to get food. The rest stop was rather large and busy. It had about 5 restaurants in it. There must have been at least 100 people inside. We went in and saw there was lines for every restaurant. My parents wanted tacos, but I wanted pizza, so I got in the line for pizza, and they went around the corner. I got in the end of the line. There was maybe 5 people in front of me. I stood there and waited. After about a minute, I felt 2 arms grab my shoulders. I thought it was my dad, but when I looked, it was some guy who looked like he was 50 or 60. He had on a leather jacket and grayish hair. He was smiling and asked me what kind of pizza I was buying. I told him cheese, and he said he would buy it for me. I said no thanks, but he insisted. I figured free pizza is free pizza, so I said all right. He talked to me the entire time we were in line, just asking me lots of basic questions about myself. I was hoping my parents would come over. I couldn't see them because the taco place was around the corner. Eventually, he got the pizza for me, and I told him I needed to get back to my parents. He told me he saw them go outside and they were waiting for me and started to lead me outside. Looking back, I can't believe I was so stupid, but I actually believed him. We walked outside and we got towards the parking lot, but I could see my car and my parents were not there. I started to turn around, but the man put his arm around my shoulder and kept walking. I asked him where we were going. He started to walk faster and his grip got tighter. He just kept smiling and told me to shut up. I then told the man to let me go. He said shut up again. We reached his car, which was parked in the far corner. I was not going to get in his car. I yelled at him to let me go as loud as I could before he covered my mouth. I was able to get some people's attention. A woman came over to us. The man said I was just being difficult and everything was fine. I told her no it wasn't, and I used this opportunity to run to the woman. The man continued to try to pretend that I was with him, but I could tell the woman wasn't buying it, and I told her to call the police. At this moment, the man got into his car and drove off. I am disappointed to say I didn't get the license plate, but I did get back to my parents, who called the police, and they questioned me. I don't believe the man was ever caught, but I'm sure glad I wasn't abducted. I am a 23-year-old female. This story took place last summer. I had just recently gotten a new car. Well, actually it was used, but it was only 8 years old and was much better than the 2003 car I had been driving. The car had no problems, but did need to get its tires rotated. So about a week after I bought it, I took it to a local mechanic. I had never been to the guy before, but his prices seemed pretty low. I drove the car to the shop, which was located on a quiet end of town and not really next to anything else. I went inside and gave the mechanic the keys. I had made the appointment online, and when I got there, he said it would be about 30 minutes or less and told me I could wait in the waiting room while the work was done. I went in and sat down in a chair in the waiting room. There was nobody else at the shop, and it was rather old. The place looked like it hadn't been updated at all since the 1980s. They even had a big box TV that was on, and it played the Weather Channel on it. I sat down and went on my phone for this time. When about 20 minutes had passed, the mechanic came back in and said that my car was done. After that, I drove back home and everything was normal. But about a week later, I was driving home from work one night, and I heard what sounded like a faint buzzing noise. I thought it was a bug in the car at first, so I rolled down a few windows and hoped it would fly out. But the sound kept going, and after I put the windows back up and listened closer, I could hear it wasn't exactly the sound of a bug. I drove the rest of the way home, and then turned my car off and listened. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds, but then I heard it again. I looked around my car and saw something behind the mirror. It was a little black thing that was mounted, and when I examined it, it appeared to be a camera. It was very well hidden, and I hadn't noticed it until looking extremely close. I ended up looking very closely around the rest of my car, and I ended up finding 2 more cameras. I took them inside and later brought them to the police. It turned out the mechanic put them in my car to spy on me. It was extremely creepy, and I never should have took my car to him in the first place.
When I was a kid in the 90s, I used to seriously hate going to school. There would be at least one day a month where I would wake up and have it decided in my head that I was staying home. I'd do whatever it took, pretend to puke, glue myself to the toilet, cry, you name it, I'd do it. I'd do it because it worked. My parents were working class, all-day laborers, and couldn't afford to stay home or argue with me. By the time I was in 4th grade, 10 years old, they'd cave and just let me stay home alone, the days that I pretended to be sick. I remember one morning waking up and not having to fake it. My stomach was in knots, my throat was on fire, and I couldn't even keep my own spit down. Seemingly anything had me throwing up. Because of my habit of staying home, I was hell-bent on having some fun, even at the cost of a little discomfort. I lounged in the recliner, what I considered a gaming chair, and played some of my favorite video games. The bathroom upstairs was around the corner from my room, at the end of the hall. For no particular reason, this bathroom creeped me out from day one. I personally believe in ghosts and stuff like that as a kid. Again, for no real reason. I cooked up the idea that in my head, sometimes I saw things down there at the end of the hallway. The reality was there was a window way up high on the wall. It would cast odd shadows down at the base of the wall. I knew this, but liked to scare myself and my friends whenever they came over. Being home alone and needing to take a leak, I decided I would go downstairs to both use the bathroom and investigate our fridge. As I got up, I kind of sidestepped into the hallway, and of course saw something weird out of the side of my eye. It looked like a big looming man in the corner of the hall. Now this spooked me, and I booked it downstairs and waited. Nothing. I figured if it was a real person, I'd hear them walking. As you can imagine, I was alone. I go into the bathroom and do my business, and then head to the kitchen. The fridge was right beside our front door, so as I'm looking inside, I'm parallel to the front doorknob. I'm looking around and not finding anything that I can stomach, when I hear something weird, a jingling. I look over and exactly what I thought was happening. The front doorknob was wiggling back and forth. It's locked, thank God. My parents were security prone. The deadbolt was even locked, but still, I knew immediately that this was not anyone that lived here. We lived in a pretty good neighborhood, average sized suburb, but in my mind at the time, anything was possible. Beside the door is a big window, and something moves back and forth beyond the curtain. I watch in total horror as some skinny old guy leans over with his hands cupped to the glass and peers inside. His eyes go left, then right, and they fall on me. And this big, awful smile stretches across his face. He taps on the glass like I'm some animal at the zoo. I remember slamming the fridge closed so hard that I could hear everything shift around inside. For some reason, probably adrenaline, I thought that my mom was going to kill me when she got home and opened up the fridge and found the booby trap that I just made. I remember being more worried about that than the guy looking in the window. Again, I was like 10 or 11 when this happened, so I fancied myself a strapping young man in my head. I was also used to staying home alone and had dealt with a lot of different people coming to our door. Electricity and water department workers, gas gauge checkers, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and any other number of people prone to knocking. I ran through a mental checklist as I looked this creep up and down. He definitely wasn't here to see my mom or dad. Definitely wasn't on the clock. He wasn't even knocking. I mean, if there's a red flag, this guy was firmly holding it in his hand. "Hey, why don't you come open up the door?" he said, pointing down to the handle. "I was just here yesterday." My head starts swimming. The hell is this guy talking about in here yesterday? Does he work for my dad? Does he know my older sister? I took a step forward because I was so caught off guard. He almost got me for a second. I was about to open up the door out of denial, hoping there was some sort of rational explanation. I caught myself after that first step, shook my head. No way, dude. He then shook his head too, and then kicked the house siding hard as hell, hard enough to make me jump. The whole kitchen was behind me, and the stairs off to the right of the room where the living room began. On the far side of the kitchen, there was a little hallway that led back to my parents' room, plus the laundry room, a bathroom, and then the side entrance for the garage. When I remembered the garage, this entire plan springs into action in my head. To this day, I've never had a more clean, pragmatic line of thinking as I did that day. It kind of bums me out, to tell you the truth. And I've been told it's because that's the only time my life has ever been on the line. Anyway, we kept a lot of things in the garage, like our camping and outdoor gear. This also included my cheap Walmart special paintball gun. It was one of those clear gray pump action pistols. Took the CO2 cylinder in the bottom of the handle and slung a paintball hard enough to break a window. I know that from experience. I grabbed it, immediately changed the cylinder out of habit because I knew whatever the hell was in there had to be dead. I slammed a couple of handfuls of paintballs into the hopper. Good to go. I looked down though and saw something else that we kept in the garage. A splitting log, which had a hatchet sticking out of the top. I yanked it out and tucked it into my pajama pants. Crept back down the hallway. Now I can hear the guy messing with the door, so when I peek around the corner, he's no longer looking in the window. I bolt as fast as my sick little body would allow me, through the kitchen and then up the stairs. The landing led right into my bedroom, where I planned on barricading myself. I figured I'd shoot the guy if he came upstairs, and if that didn't deter him, I'd have to use the hatchet once he got inside. In my head it was foolproof, but something told me to stop. Something better occurred to me then. Instead of my room, I went around the corner and towards the creepy bathroom at the end of the hall. It felt crazy, but something told me this was the best plan. I stopped and went into the bathroom. I slid the window open as quietly as I could. I knew if I could fit through the opening. I knew the roof was easy to walk over from there. I'd snuck onto the roof a number of times this way, and I know if I crept around, I'd be able to see the front door. I pulled myself through, tiptoed along the roof, careful not to stand too tall or step too loudly. Honestly, the guy was an adult. He might be able to just climb right up the roof without a problem. I wanted to get the drop on this guy though. After a few steps, I came around and lo and behold, there he is, still working on the door. He's got a screwdriver, a credit card, a coat hanger, literally a kit the guys would have from Home Alone. It was cartoonish. The guy even had crazy hair and goofy clothes, like pants that were way too high. It was obvious this person was a stranger. In the moment, I wish I'd grabbed the telephone just to dial 911, and I realized that I had no idea what this guy was actually capable of. But he was desperate enough to get inside our house. It sounds crazy, but I swear it's the only thing that I could think of. I began shouting video game quotes at this, the toughest ones that I could remember from whatever games were out at the time. Obviously, I added a string of profanities, and when I first started shouting, the guy almost jumped out of his skin. Seeing him scared in just that brief moment opened up a whole new confidence in me. I started pelting him with paintballs. The chest, the hands, the face, the throat. I shot him everywhere, black and blue, literally. He was only 15 or 20 feet away, and I shot that thing every day at that point in my life. I could hit a dog turd at 50 paces. A full-grown man was an easy target. I'll never forget how he started screaming, like top of the lungs screaming. I think he thought I was shooting him for real, as those old single-pump paintball guns were loud as hell when they fired. Add that instant sting that he felt. He probably thought it was real for a second or two. Either way, he danced out of my sight. He composed himself, then started hollering threats of all kinds. He was saying them all in this deep, creepy voice that he didn't have before, when he was asking me to open up the house. I ran around to the other side of the roof, and by God, there he was, stalking around the opposite corner. I didn't even need to tell you that I let this guy up again, but this time he just booked it and jumped over the fence. He walked back to the little creek that separated some houses, rinsed the paint off of him, then wandered up the road. And you can believe I watched him for every step of that. Once he disappeared, I ran fast as hell inside, never dropping my weapons, and got a hold of our phone. I wanted to call the cops, but just opted to call my mom instead. She worked much closer and would be able to get home in at least a little bit quicker. I told her everything, and she called my dad. They both showed up not much later. I broke down at this point, as the reality set in that I was actually in danger. The story actually gets kind of crazier. The guy that was looking in the window, someone had been in our house the day before, and my parents were keyed into it because some stuff had been moved around the house. They noticed an open window in their bedroom. Some of the books were moved around, clothes moved too, and someone had a cigarette out in their bathroom sink. They knew it wasn't us kids. Obviously, neither of us smoked. They made sure to lock the doors, but other than that, they really didn't know what to make of it. It turns out that guy who peeked in our window had been casing houses up and down our neighborhood. 2 or 3 had already been robbed, and a 4th summer home, but over a dozen had been probed and valued, including ours. He would come up to a house, go through as much of their belongings as possible before being discovered, then come back the next day right when everyone was leaving and get what he wanted. He didn't account for me staying home that day, my parents locking everything up after having that first weird experience. I'm so glad that I live in the time that I do, as you can imagine. I have cameras everywhere now, security to the max, and a big .357 revolver instead of that paintball gun. All thanks to that childhood weirdo. I was around 16 years old at the time. It happened in the suburbs of New Jersey. It was about 8 p.m. and completely dark outside. I was alone in the apartment where my aunt and I lived on the 4th floor of a very old apartment building in a very tiny complex. When you looked out the living room window, they looked down on the parking lot. The walls were paper thin, and the windows seemed to be single pane because you could hear everything going on out there. You could especially hear when a car arrived. It was second nature to look out the window at the sound of a car because, well, we're so nosy, I guess. That night, I heard the sound of a very loud pickup truck. My uncles lived just down the road, and both drove pickup trucks and visited regularly. So I got up to check the window to see if it was one of them. This time it was not. It was a beat-up old Chevy truck with rust all over the place. Inside were 2 teenagers. The second I came to the window, the driver pointed straight at me, as though he absolutely knew who he was looking for and where I was. Now that freaked me the hell out, and I took a step back. I was about to walk into the other room and just try to shake it off when there was a pounding on the apartment door. All I could think was, the hell? I walked over to the door as quietly as I could, trying to step on the rug and not the wood floor. I leaned to the door without touching it. I held my breath as I looked through the peephole. I couldn't believe what I was now seeing. Out there in the stairwell were two very agitated looking teenage boys. They were twitchy and jumpy, clearly on something, and one of them was holding a Home Depot bucket. And here's where my brain must have snapped into some sort of dissociative panic mode that would come back to haunt me later. In the bucket there was duct tape, a rope, a hammer, some wood, and a long, serrated looking knife, like the kind you use to cut spray foam to make it smooth. I pulled back from the door immediately. My brain was going 1,000 miles an hour. For just the briefest of moments, I thought, there's no way this is real. There's no way they're just carrying a bucket of these murder tools right out in the open for me to see. It's so stupid. This has to be some sort of joke. Yeah, it has to be. I went to the people again to try to get a good look at them. I didn't recognize either one. Let me tell you how significant this was for me. I was pretty well liked at my high school. I moved between social groups very easily. I got along with everybody. I got to know pretty much everybody, and everybody got to know me. Part of this, I believe, is because I came into high school with my self-confidence guns blazing. I had spent horrific years in middle school being bullied relentlessly for being a lesbian. When I got to high school, I swore I would never let anyone use that weapon against me ever again. So on the first day of 9th grade, when it was time to get up and introduce ourselves in the class, I said, "Hi, my name is insert name. I like girls." People were really impressed. They actually loved it. They loved how open I was, and they loved that they could ask me questions about anything. Looking back, part of me wonders if all my confidence blinded me to the fact that perhaps I made myself a target. When I realized I didn't know either of these guys, and that they were not friends playing some kind of weird prank, my heart sank even further. Now you would think the most common sense thing to do at this point would be to call the police, and you're right, it would be. But of course that's not what I did. You see, I knew that if I called the police and my aunt found out about this, I would never have a moment to myself ever again. My aunt was already hyper paranoid about child abductions. Pretty much anything she could ever watch on a Lifetime movie turned into concrete fear for her every day. I can't tell you what it took to convince her that I, a 16-year-old, would be okay in an apartment by myself for a few hours in the evening. So of course, my selfish, stupid teenage brain put that in priority over, staying alive. Through the peephole, I could see that one of them had stopped bouncing and twitching long enough to slowly lean his head towards the door, trying to listen for movement inside. I knew this was my chance. The second his ear touched the door, I pulled my hand back and slammed the door right where his ear was, and let out the deepest, most guttural shriek that I've ever made in my entire life. He fell backward. His friend tripped over him. They grabbed each other and started fumbling down the stairs. I got all the way to the floor and peeked through the very bottom blinds of the front window to see the truck peeling right out of there, tires smoking. Not one neighbor came out to see if I was okay, and I know they heard me. That was just as terrifying as the experience that I just had. I could hear on a regular basis when my neighbor to the left would sneeze too loudly, but none of them heard me screaming. Yeah, okay. I never saw those guys or that truck ever again, and despite how long I've made this story, the entire incident couldn't have taken more than 8 minutes from start to finish. I completely believe that seeing that bucket full of murder weapons was the moment my brain went into self-preservation mode. And because there was no aftermath, because there was no repercussions, and because I didn't talk to this about anyone, it started to feel even less real as time moved on. I questioned it over and over. Did this really happen to me? But I know it happened. It was just so damn weird and unexpected that my brain didn't have the neat little compartment to put it in. The pestering question is why? Was it actually random, or was it actually targeted? And they even know that I was home alone. I'm retired now, but I worked as an inspector for both private companies and the county throughout my career. I was asked by a private home builder to inspect a house halfway through its construction, and then they would submit my inspection to the county. I get inside and start doing my job, wandering around with a clipboard and a flashlight. It's pretty routine, up until I get to the back end of the house. I can hear something. There seems to be trash scattered in some of the rooms, and I hear a buzzing, like a radio or something. Then it hits me. There's probably a contractor here, someone finishing up the drywall or something to that effect. I peek into the master bedroom, and inside I spot a woman. She's dirty, somewhat around 30 or 35. She's definitely not working on the property. Excuse me, are you supposed to be in here? I asked, hoping she was the homebuyer's wife or something. Of course I am. What are you doing in my house? She replied. I'm the home inspector. I scheduled with her husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough. I guess I didn't realize anyone would be here. She grumbled and gave me some kind of response, then vanished into the bathroom area. Not all the drywall was up, so I could still see her feet and arms as she shuffled around, continuing to make these weird noises. At this point, I was kind of creeped out and was ready to get the hell out of there. This was well before pocket cell phone, so I was on my own out there, at least until I could get back to my car. I hadn't encountered much in the way of weird at this point in my career, and this lady was about to culture me with a great deal, if you catch my drift. She came back from the bathroom with the biggest kitchen knife that I've ever seen, and planted it right through a piece of hanging drywall. I took a step back out of pure instinct, and did my best to ask her what the hell she was doing. What came out sounded something like, what is it you're doing? She didn't miss a beat though. I don't have a husband, so I think you need to leave. I look around the floor. I see the trash for what it really is. Pack rat stuff, food wrappers, tissues, toilet paper. This lady is crazy and homeless, and she's just moved in. By the look of it, she's been crashing here for at least a couple of days. Probably hasn't had a care in the world. Now, the only thing to piss her off is me, and I'm stuck here with her. Alright, simple logic prevails. Time to go. I tuck my clipboard up on a shelf, check my pockets for my car keys, and begin back up towards the exit. Don't leave your pictures here. They'll want those back at the station, she says, pointing at my clipboard. I shake my head and raise my hands to show them that they're empty, and I keep moving backward. She doesn't like this. She starts breathing weird, like super hard and deep. I take my own deep breath and go back to grab that clipboard. Anything to mediate the mood. This triggers her even worse somehow. This lady starts screaming like a banshee. She takes a run at me, and it scares me so bad that I almost fall backwards. I only caught myself by the threshold of the door, which I can firmly say held my weight. A+ for construction on my inspection so far. Thankfully, she stopped short. Didn't really charge fully at me, but her screaming has created another sound. Something out of place. I turn to find a man, a little older than the girl, shamble out from a closet, or some partially finished nook. He's shirtless, tattooed, and gaunt. Definitely a junkie. "You woke me up," he said. "You shouldn't be here. Why'd you wake me up?" I tried to answer, but what the hell was I gonna say to this guy? I could tell by his look, logic, it wasn't gonna speak to him. Then the woman came back down the hall from where they were standing and had me kinda cornered. "He says my husband sent him," she said. "Threw me right under the bus." Then the guy starts to lose it, flexing, bugging out, hyperventilating, that sort of thing. He starts pressing me about how her husband found them, where he was, and if he was close. Total druggy paranoia. I assured them that I didn't know the guy. I had no business with them. I was just there to simply look over the house. I made a mistake and got the wrong address, and I would be on my way out without any more issues. They'd never see me again. Apparently, at least from what I gleaned, they were on the run from this lady's husband. He was a drug dealer, and they owed him a boatload of cash. They were on their way out of the city on foot, and they spotted the partial build on its own. It became their little cracked-in haven for at least 48 hours. It didn't matter though. They wouldn't let it go. They were beyond convinced that I was a resp for her husband. I'd found them, and now someone needed to make a move. It was by far the scariest standoff that I could imagine, as I wasn't prepared to take on not one, but two agitated crackheads. As they closed in, it occurred to me that the only ace up my sleeve was the crap that they were telling themselves. I had to go with a lie, and the second that I did, they completely changed gears. "Your husband isn't gonna like any of this. You know he's outside, right?" Both of their jaws immediately hit the floor, and then they sprinted over to the window to do what junkies do. Peep through the blinds, work that window like a true crazy person, see what's out there. I proceeded to back through the house until I made some distance, then ran as quick as I could to get back to my car. I was horrified when I looked up to find them chasing me across the front yard. They were much paler and thinner than I first pegged them for inside the house. Out in the sun, they were even creepier. Because of their look, I dropped my keys in the dirt before I could even unlock my car. All I could do was snatch them up and start running again, aiming for the next cluster of new builds. I saw a couple of trucks parked near them earlier, so I was praying to myself a construction crew would be nearby, anyone normal to help me even out the teams. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to run very far, and I stayed well ahead of the junky house dwellers, but they still didn't give up the chase. I spilled into the nearest house, and right there, a crew of 5 guys met me with hammers and saws, asking me what the hell I was up to. It was exactly what I wanted to see. I explained that I was a home inspector, was working next door. Some druggies inside caught me off guard and chased me over here. They gave me the green light, and they went outside to confront the duo on the lawn. It went exactly how you would expect it to. The crack twins started telling some crazy-ass story, and the construction guys snapped them both up and put them on the ground, called the nearest police station. They sat on top of them until the cops arrived, at which point I had to clarify my story a little bit more. The whole thing was absolutely wild, and they got hauled off with their belongings. I said a big thanks to the work team that saved me, even dropped a few gift cards off for them later on that week. There was minimal damage to the house, except for the bathroom that they were hiding out in. It had the craziest graffiti that you could imagine. I swear it looked like it was painted in blood, carved out with a knife, and straight burned into the wood and drywall. It was something out of a movie. All insane devil worship stuff, I think. I've always felt like I got away pretty lucky that day, as they both seemed pretty strung out as I did my walkthrough. Had I caught them when they were more coherent, who knows what could have happened. I'm a 46-year-old male, and while I wouldn't say I've had a life of danger and intrigue, I have worked a handful of unusual jobs. I've traveled a good bit, and have some interesting life experiences. I've also inherited some strange traits from my father, which attracts weirdos, crazies, and the troublemakers. I don't know if it's my appearance or just some sort of aura, but if I'm in a crowd and there's a mentally unstable homeless person in the vicinity, you can damn well bet that they're going to approach me. When I tell people this, they often think that I'm kidding or exaggerating, but those who are around me long enough will eventually find out that it's all true. Over the years, I've amassed a collection of stories, most of them being humorous, strange, and just interesting tales. But I do have a few stories that are just downright scary. Today, I would like to share one of those with you. On a final note before I begin, I've included some details in this story that may seem unrelated to the incident itself. My reasoning for doing so is not only because I think the setting and context are significant, but also because I've got more stories from this awful period in my life. This will make a lot more sense once you hear the story. Now let the fun begin. Back in the early 2000s, I was living in the city of Pittsburgh and worked as a credit manager for a rental company. A few years prior, I had foolishly dropped out of college and was living in an apartment that I couldn't really afford. Bills were starting to pile up. I needed to find a job with a decent wage. A friend contacted me and told me that he was leaving his job. The company would be looking for a replacement. When he first told me about the job, I naively thought the company rented out furniture and appliances to businesses just for events, and once they were finished renting the items, they would conveniently be returned. How hard could that be? Boy, was I in for a rude awakening. After I got hired, I found out that the company's business model was to rent to own, and they preyed on welfare recipients and people with low incomes. The cheap rental rates for furniture, TVs, stereos, and appliances were enticing to those who couldn't afford such things. But unbeknownst to the renters, the items would take years to pay off. These people would end up paying 10 times more than what the item was really worth. My job title was just a fancy name for a repo man. If someone couldn't pay or refused to pay, it was my job to hunt them down and repossess those items. Oddly, out of all the insane situations that I'd encountered while out repoing in the projects, this occurrence actually took place behind the store on my day off. It's important to note that generally, when you see a rent-to-own store, it's either or near a rough neighborhood. Usually, they're located conveniently near one of those payday loan stores or a token liquor store. The shopping plaza where we were located wasn't in that bad of an area, but it was closest to the shopping center to the nearby projects. I'd heard a rumor that the plaza's large parking lot was a hotbed for drug activity. And while it wasn't that uncommon to see multiple lit up police cars in the lot, I never knew if it was just drug bust or maybe just crackheads shoplifting. Now, being this was my day off, work was the last place that I wanted to be, but the van that I drove at the time was having engine troubles. So when my shift ended on the previous night, I left the van in the back of the store and then got a ride from a coworker who lived nearby. The plan was to get a ride back to the store in the late morning, bring my tools and work on the van, and hopefully, get it back up and running. I remember that it was actually a beautiful summer day, which is pretty rare in Pittsburgh, so I was happy at least that I didn't have to work out in the rain. The back of the store looked like your typical loading dock area that you would see at any shopping plaza throughout the US. The plaza itself was fairly large and roughly 300 yards long. Across from the loading docking area was where all these stores kept their dumpsters. Beyond the dumpsters, there's overgrown weeds and bushes, then railroad tracks, and eventually, a wooded area that ran along the Monongahela River. Our store was located smack dab in the middle of that shopping center. I ended up getting there a little later than I wanted to. My van was high enough that I didn't need to jack it up, so I threw down some cardboard and just got immediately to work. There were some preliminary things that I had to do before I got to whatever the real, actual problem was. So I didn't really get things apart until by afternoon. And by then, it was moving back and forth between the driver's seat and the space between the van. Hours ticked by, and soon, the sun was starting to go down. I don't remember exactly how long I was under there or had been working, but I remember that I was in the driver's seat, trying to get the van started. At this point, I thought I had it pretty much pegged. I was pulling myself out from underneath the van, and I heard distant running footsteps. I stood up and saw this skinny dude about 75 yards away from me, running toward me. Aside from the immediate thinking that it was an odd place to be out for a jog, I didn't think much more of it. As he got closer to me, I nodded and said hi. But when he looked at me, there was the look of pure fear and panic. This man wasn't jogging, he was full on sprinting. He was younger than I initially thought. Maybe he was in his mid-20s and he was casually dressed, but they definitely weren't clothes that you'd wear while jogging. Completely confused, I just stood there, watched him run toward the dumpsters and then disappear. While it was odd, you usually don't see people in the back of the plaza. I was used to seeing weirdos and the occasional river people, or just homeless people who camped out near the riverbank. I shrugged it off and decided to get back to work. Around 30 seconds later, I hear footsteps once again. I see another man running toward me. As he approached, I could tell this man was bigger and maybe in his late 30s. He had a beard and was wearing a hat. There's something about him that was a lot more intimidating though. I'm 6'2" and at the time, I weighed about 215 pounds. People often said that I looked intimidating, to which you kinda had to at the job that I was at, but it only took one look from this man to know that he wasn't somebody to f with. Once he was within about 10 yards from me, he yelled, "Where is he? Where'd he go?" Without hesitation, I quickly pointed towards the dumpsters. Looking back, I felt like a pushover, just doing what this stranger told me to do. But there was this assertiveness about this guy that just made me instantly comply. This is where it starts to get crazy. Together with the bearded man walking just slightly behind me, I began to head over toward the dumpsters, which were maybe 25 yards away. Thinking by now that skinny guy was long gone, probably deep in the wooded area near the river, I was just going to point out in the general direction to where he ran. But as we approached the dumpsters, I noticed a crouching figure behind one of them, and all of a sudden I hear, "Get the f out here now!" When I turned around, I saw that bearded man. He was now a few feet away from me, aiming a gun directly at Skinny Guy. Dumbfounded, I just stood there, frozen, as if I couldn't process what was all going on. Skinny Guy stands up and hesitantly walks towards the bearded man, who grabs him and shouts to him immediately, throws him onto the pavement. I was soon snapped out of my frozen state by the sound of screeching tires. At the opposite end of the plaza, maybe 150 yards away, I turned to see a pickup fishtailing around the bend, headed straight for us at full speed. It was at this moment I realized I needed to get the hell out of this situation, instead of just standing there with my mouth hanging open. I ran back toward my van and just hid behind it. I see the pickup truck slam on its brakes just a few feet away from Skinny Guy on the ground. 2 armed men get out of the truck. Another armed man jumps down from the back of the truck. All the men were yelling angrily. 2 of the men grab Skinny Guy and yank him up off the ground. They drag him to the back of the pickup, and at gunpoint, one of them yells, "Get in the f***ing truck!" They made Skinny Guy lie down, face first, on the truck bed. At this point, you can no longer see him. 2 of the men get inside the cab, while the other 2, still with guns drawn, climb back into the truck bed. As they're about to leave, the 2 men in the truck bed hunch down and try to look less conspicuous. While I could no longer see their guns, it was obvious by the way that their arms were extended. They still had their guns aimed at the Skinny Guy's head. They sped off and disappeared around that bend. For a split moment, I just stood there in disbelief, wondering what the hell I just witnessed. It all happened so fast. After the bearded man drew his gun, it seemed like from his perspective, I no longer even existed. Who the hell were those guys? Were they members of some criminal organization or drug dealers? Maybe they were even undercovers for the DEA. I thought of the possibilities that maybe they were even dirty cops. You'd think if they were law enforcement or DEA, they would have at least announced it and talked like cops, or maybe even used handcuffs. Yet if they were criminals, they sure seemed organized. Didn't seem to care about waving their guns around either. Nor did they care about the fact that I was witnessing all of it. Shortly after I had these thoughts and they ran through my head, I ran into the store to tell my coworkers what just happened. I honestly can't remember who was all there that day, but I distinctly remember 2 of my coworkers who were there. We'll call them Sarah and Mark to protect their identities. Sarah was the receptionist, Mark was the store manager. When I told them everything that just happened, they were both said something to the effect of, "Damn, that's crazy." Yet it was like they couldn't comprehend the severity of what really happened. It wasn't like they completely shrugged it off, but they didn't seem to be as shocked as I was. It was absolutely wild to me, the difference in our reactions. They were just pretty much focused on closing down. I was out back, frontline to the chaos. It was a perfect dichotomy. I thought maybe it was because everyone in this godforsaken place had become so numb to the insanity, used to hearing crazy stories from the so-called road dogs like myself. Honestly, they probably weren't all that surprised to hear the people behind the store were waving guns around. After seeing their underwhelmed reactions, I regained my composure and went back outside to finish working on my van. About a half an hour later, I saw 2 men slowly walking behind the dumpster area, where the pavement ended and the weeds began. Occasionally, they would stop and look through the weeds and bushes, and eventually made their way onto the railroad tracks, still looking as if they were searching for something. They weren't there for very long, and after a few minutes of looking around, they just walked away and disappeared. After that, I never heard or saw from any of those guys ever again. To this day, I don't know why I didn't report any of this incident to the police. I guess a part of me suspected they were somehow involved. My theory was the armed men were undercover cops, either police or DEA. They'd staged a drug deal and were running surveillance on one, and then they tried to arrest the Skinny Guy, or else maybe he grew suspicious and that's why he fled the scene. After fleeing, the Skinny Guy stashed or tossed the drugs somewhere, hence the guy who were looking around afterwards. That seems to be the most plausible scenario. Yet another part of me has some doubts about it all. Something about the whole thing was just off, and while it's not like the incident haunts my conscience on a daily basis or anything, sometimes I do get this guilty feeling, as if I ratted that Skinny Guy out and sent him to his death. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll never know. I ended up quitting that job almost a year later. I worked there for 3 years, and toward the end, I began to notice that I'd become very cynical, mean, and depressed. I also became a heavy drinker, among other things, and I knew I had to get out of that place and find a new path, which thankfully eventually I did. Anyhow, I've tried to bury and forget most of these memories from that time in my life, but there were a few Repo incidents that I can't forget. Like the time I almost had to jump out of a second-story window, or the time I had to hide from a customer's psychotic husband. If there's anyone interested in these stories, leave a comment. Life is pretty busy these days, so it may take me some time, but I enjoy writing and have plenty to write about. Thanks for listening.
Back in my senior year of high school, I worked at a local gas station to help my mom and brother with rent. It definitely wasn't the best paying job, but it helped us get by to the point where we were in a much better financial position than we were. While on the job, you definitely had to deal with many issues with customers, especially during the night. These types of customers usually ranged from the drunk types to the more aggressive types. Thankfully, the area I worked at was relatively safe, so I mainly got people who came in wanting a beer or a midnight snack. There was this one night, however, that will never leave me. It is absolutely true, and it's something that definitely chilled me to the bone. I had been scheduled to work one night as the person who was supposed to be working had called out. This made me annoyed as it was supposed to be my day off, but in the end, the night shifts were relatively chill. I drive over to work at around 8 p.m. and began my shift as usual by clocking in. I'd say right away, several customers came in, mostly paying for gas or a quick drink. On this night, the same routine happened, and it wasn't until 11ish where people would stop coming in as the night would die down. Fast forward till around 2 a.m. I'm behind the counter playing Sudoku to pass time when I see a car pull in. I think nothing of it and just assume it's probably someone wanting a snack or something. However, I then see a woman step out of the driver's side, looking up at the security camera. She seemed to be around her early 30s, wearing nothing but a sweater and some jeans. The way she stared at the camera, though, just seemed like she was watching it for no apparent reason. After a good minute, she then walks into the store and right away starts talking to herself. I couldn't really make out as to what she was saying, but if I had to say, it sounded like she was talking about a person named John. I just minded my business and figured that she had some sort of mental disorder. In fact, my cousin suffered from something similar, so it immediately hit close to home. She walks around seemingly cautiously around the shelves while biting her nails as if she were worried about something. Part of me wanted to ask if she needed help, but the other part of me didn't. Eventually, she casually picks up a candy bar, and I gladly ring her up while telling her the total. However, she doesn't get out a credit card or even cash, and just stands there looking dead at me while talking about this John guy. I'm not really sure what it was, but there was something about her eyes and nose that gave off such an eerie feeling, not to mention that she kind of looked like the girl from the Ring movie. After what felt like hours, I just said that she could take the candy as I didn't want the situation to be more awkward than it already was. With that, she finally left and got in her car, driving off in what seemed like a hurry. For the next 2 hours, I waited until my shift was over when the person working after me had come in. It was around 5 a.m. and had gone home to go to sleep and woke up at around 12 to several missed calls from an unknown number. The thing that struck me the most was this one and only voicemail that was left. I put it on speaker and instantly became shocked when I hear the same voice of the woman repeatedly saying John louder and louder. This was followed by a very loud, high-pitched scream at the end which made my blood run cold. It was something I've never heard before, as it didn't even sound human. I have no idea how she got my number or who John is or was. Long story short, I end up getting my number changed very quickly, where I thankfully never heard or saw her again. Before I begin, I want to point out that there is something very off about my story. This took place around 12 years ago, and it's still one of the most creepiest and unexplainable experiences I've had. I'll try my best to explain my encounter in the best detail as possible. This happened when I was in my late 30s on a road trip with my mom and sister. We had all been driving cross-country somewhere in the southern US. Looking back, I can't remember what state it was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was somewhere between Texas and Oklahoma. It was around 11 at night, and I remember we had found ourselves on an interstate that night in need of food and gas. Thankfully, my sister had pointed out that she had seen a sign that had a rest stop up ahead. It seemed to be the only gas station for several miles, so with no other choice, we had to stop there. We pull in, and right off the bat, we see a van full of teenagers and two men standing by a small gray car. We weren't sure as to what it was, but almost immediately, something about this place seemed very wrong. My sister and I had went inside the gas station to use the restroom, but the strange part was that there was no gas station attendant anywhere. On our way out, we had overheard the teenagers say that they had felt creeped out and that the gas pump wasn't even working. The teenagers leave in a hurry, but the two men by the car hadn't moved at all, just standing there. Not talking, not on their phones, nothing. However, as my sister turned to look at the men, she had claimed to see their eyes being black, dark, and empty. The both of us get into the car and floored it out of there and didn't stop until we hit the next city. After we had made it to our destination, we had looked just about everywhere on a map but couldn't find that gas station anywhere. We had figured that it was maybe due to the fact that it was just too small to be a location. In the next city over, we had asked around and told some of the locals about the station on the interstate. We even went out of our way to give them the exact location of it, but only got confused looks. Some people say they didn't know about it or simply said that there was no gas station there. Overall, it was a really weird experience and none of us can figure it out till this day. We had been down that interstate since, but had never seen that gas station again. The interstate is a very small 2-lane road, so if there was something there, you would have seen it. A few days into our stay, and we had spoken to a guy who had claimed to be a trucker and had told us similar stories. In the end, we had accepted the fact that there was no rest stop there. I still get chills thinking about it till this day. Sometimes I like to think that maybe this was a dream or a deja vu episode. We don't really tell many people about this, as we'd assume most would think we're crazy or lying. Either way, this was and still is one of the most creepiest and unexplainable encounters we've ever experienced. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what we saw. We even asked more locals about it too. A few months later, we learned that a family had gone missing for nearly a week near the area of the station. They were eventually found, as well as their station wagon. The strange part was that they basically abandoned their car. When they were found, they all seemed to be out of it, especially their children. They seemed sort of spacey and fuzzy. As far as we know, everyone is fine now, but I'm starting to believe they saw the same thing. However, up until now, there have been no leads, and that gas station has never been found.
So as a kid around 11 or 12, I had the world on my plate. We have these woods around us that I never ever came close to finding the edge of. I would wake up in the morning early when school was out, and my friend Alex and I would spend the whole day mucking around those woods. We would pack sandwiches and sodas, just go nuts. Play army and war, cowboys and Indians, you name it. This being the 80s, Alex and I being smart enough kids. My parents had no problem with this and enjoyed taking us to the Army surplus store to buy stuff like MREs and survival knives and camping gear. It's pretty regular that we'd be allowed to stay out overnight if my dad was out there to help us set up camp and close to the property. We daydreamed all kinds of crazy stuff, discovering hidden treasure or uncovering fossils of some unbelievable creature. Maybe we'd find the wreckage of an airplane or strike it rich with gold in one of the dry riverbeds. The possibilities were endless out there. We made sure to take full advantage of. The honest truth was there really wasn't much of anything out there besides our relentless imagination. One day, after a whole morning of playing, we find a treehouse in the part of the woods we've never been to before. Probably a 2-hour trek from the edge of the neighborhood, maybe 2 or 3 miles at most. It was hilly and rocky. Seriously, a kid's dream. This treehouse was probably 30 feet off the ground, but it looked solid. We're stoked to find a new castle. We hightail it back to get some rope, and my pops takes us down to the surplus store. Over dinner, Alex and I just can't shut up about it. The next day comes. We hike out at almost dawn. We get a full backpack of rope and sandwiches and our knives on our hips. The excitement that's so thick we could chew on it. We finally make it out there, and we start attaching rungs made of big sticks onto one end of the rope. It took us a good few hours, but we finally got one side finished, and the rope tossed over the branch. That's where the little deck and the door are. We finally climb up and are sitting on the deck, looking out, playing rock, paper, scissors for who gets to go in first. Alex wins, goes in and comes right back out. He's white as a sheet, wants to go home. I'm curious, so I go inside next. This treehouse is probably 8 by 8, 7 to 8 feet high inside. The inside walls are covered, every single inch of naked girls. Not some awesome Playboy porn, but kiddie porn. I think the oldest kids were about my age. It was Polaroids, glossy magazine pages, stuck perfectly up with staples and filling the entire wall up. When I exited the treehouse, I had a super nauseous feeling. When I looked at Alex, I felt even worse. He was staring at something off in the distance. He looked terrified. I followed his gaze, and sure enough, there was a flashlight bobbing through the trees toward our location. My knees gave out. I struggled to get myself over to the ladder, whispering for Alex to follow me. It took a moment, but he snapped out of it, and we scrambled down the rope as quickly as we could. As we touched down, the light from the approaching person was reaching through the underbrush and actually now touching me. I couldn't see it through the branches and overgrowth, but the fact that they were so close was panic-inducing. I waved for Alex to follow me. We just managed to get out of sight in time. Some guy walked into the clearing, froze in place when he saw our little ladder dangling from the deck above. He knew someone had been inside his freak show treehouse. Exit Alex and I, getting back home as quickly as we could. At first, we ran quietly, at least until we were sure that guy wasn't following us. It was like twilight or so when he came upon us, so between brush and the coming darkness, everything kind of worked out in our favor. We informed my dad about it, and he called the police. The officer showed up and asked us a few questions like where it was, how did we get up there, where did we get the rope, did we take any pictures off the wall. He got increasingly rude about it until my dad put an end to it. He left with our statement and said he would be in touch. We were no longer allowed to take overnights in the woods or be out there for more than an hour without checking in. We actually built a really long tin can phone with permission from my parents, which allowed us a little bit more of our freedom, but we were pretty cut off from deep exploring. After a year or two later, that same cop stopped me when I was hanging out in a different park, saw me smoking and caught me with the joint. Alex asked him whatever happened in that treehouse. Cop told us not to do drugs and then just left us alone. In college, many moons later, Alex sent me an email saying how he read in the big state paper, towns that are, say, the county seat have their own papers, but the capital city has a big paper. That the officer shot himself with his service revolver after his wife found out he was circulating CP. So it comes to my mind like it came to Alex's, that we found his little CP stash or cave. The creepy part came months later. Alex sent me another email saying that he went to the estate auction. One of the items for sale was a rope ladder with a bag. That's the creepiest story of me out in the woods that I have, folks. It still grosses me out and sends chills down my spine. I was on a road trip for work a couple of years ago, and most of that took me right into the middle of nowhere. One big stretch through New Mexico into Texas, through lots of little scuzzy towns that I can't recall the names of. There's one incident that happens that goes down as the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Cut straight to the scene. I'm on day 4 of the drive, and I'm making pretty good time. On this particular day though, I'd woken up late, so I got a late start. It's about sundown when I'm running out of gas, getting ready to stop like usual, except I've only actually been driving for 6 hours when I planned on driving for 9 or 10. I hadn't made the progress that I wanted to, so I decided to gas up and push on through the night. Many of these dusty highway towns have 24-hour accommodations, so I really wasn't worried about finding a hotel somewhere. I roll into a gas station maybe 30 minutes later, just before I got the e-message on my dashboard. I park my truck, stretch my legs, and check my phone. As I'm doing this, I notice a guy sitting on the ground near the entrance to the gas station. He looks homeless, but he also looks upset. It's hard to explain. He just had this deep-seated frown on his face. Tried not to look at him and just went about my business. I moved some stuff around in the backseat of my truck, double-checked my belongings, all the regular road trip stuff. I heard a sound behind me. I turn around to find the homeless guy. Here's the thing, he must have been close to 7 feet tall, the largest man I've ever seen. Not particularly bulky, just towering with big features. Big hands, big nose, big head. The rest of him was just like dirty and slender. He had some loose belongings, a blanket and an armload of various items. He asked me for a ride in the deepest voice I've ever heard. It was frightening in the sense that I felt truly powerless. This guy was so big he didn't even seem human to me, and he wanted a favor. How the hell do I say no to that? I don't think that was part of his plan. He just used his size to kind of force the answer that he wanted. I didn't cave though. I told him I'm sorry. I'm on the clock and it's a work truck. No passengers allowed, and even said so on the insurance. None of this was true, but it sounded like an official mumbo-jumbo answer. Figured he'd get me out of any further request. The guy just kind of nodded and then moved out of my way. I apologized again and then said I passed a number of vehicles headed this way. Surely someone will help you out. In my panic to get away from this monster of a man, I just kind of barreled into the convenience store to pay for my gas in person. This seemed like a perfectly logical thing to do, when in reality I was just creating steps so I could be near another person. I got a big bag of jerky, a bottle of soda, and 16 gallons of premium. I asked about the guy outside and the clerk just shrugged, so I went on my merry way. When I got back into my truck, that guy was nowhere to be found, not even in his spot by the door. I put my stuff in my truck and dribbled the gas in the tank. Kept an eye out in every direction for that 7-foot-tall hitchhiker. I didn't see him, so I pushed on. Drove until 9 p.m., something like that. I was finally tired, and I'd put the distance behind me that I so desired. I rolled into some border town, secured a hotel room, and even found a little hole-in-the-wall bar that was still serving dinner. It was a dingy little wannabe Italian spot, built inside a double-wide trailer. It had a low red light, vaguely racist decor on the walls, but was warm and the food smelled amazing coming out of the kitchen. I settled in, ordered a beer, and then just zoned out on my phone. By my count, I'd still gone over a little 200 miles since I stopped at that gas station. I was right on schedule still, all was well. As I'm going over the map, I hear some incredibly heavy footsteps creak up the stairs and onto the porch of that bar and grill. They make their way to the door, which swings open. I see the frame of that homeless guy that was at the station. All I can see is his chest and shoulders because his head is too high for the door frame. He ducks down and creeps his way into the bar, shuts the door behind him. No one really says anything, but everyone gives them this lingering look as he strolls over to the bar. I don't really think anything of this at first until I remembered the distance that I just crunched. This guy should be sitting under a flickering fluorescent light some 200 miles behind me, yet here he was, like he rode in the passenger seat of my truck. That's when it clicked. I watched as the bartender tells him he can have any table he likes. The guy takes one right in front of me. He's practically staring at me with a grin over the top of my phone. When we had our encounter, I got into the gas station earlier. This guy must have climbed into the bed of my truck. When I exited the gas station, I must have been so spooked that I was keeping an eye out around me, not really inspecting my truck at all. He probably just laid down flat that whole damn way, and I had no idea. He gave me a wink, as if to confirm my internal reasoning. There was literally no other logical way that he could be here. I scarfed down the food I ordered, slammed a beer, and left the bar as quickly as possible. The hitchhiker ate a big bowl of spaghetti in true psychotic fashion, just staring me down the whole time. It was a long, sleepless night in my hotel room. I just stared out from behind the blinds, making sure that that creep wasn't sleeping in my truck or stalking me in any way. I didn't see him the rest of the night, but that didn't mean he wasn't around. Who knows? Maybe he got a ride with someone else. Maybe he just wanted to mess with me. Either way, I'd never like to meet that 7-foot-tall phantom ever again. This is gonna sound fake, but I promise you it's not. After graduating college, my oldest brother wanted to spend the weekend camping at Lake Bessa, outside Napa in California. His girlfriend at the time, Shannon, said we could use her godfather's boat, so we hitched it up, headed up to Spanish Flat to dock. The bank of this lake is surrounded by sandy hills and rocky cliff sides in a bowl valley. It's not exactly easy to climb down in some areas. The landscape has a lot of trees. It's a very big lake, so it's possible to not see anyone around after sunset. People typically will tie up their boats and camp out on the banks. We headed towards the southeast corner, found a nice spot. We swam for over an hour or two and then had dinner. I think it must have been around 7 or maybe 8 p.m. because the sun was setting. The lake was still and beautiful. Shannon suggested we climb up the side of the bank, find some wood for a campfire. So my brother and I climbed up the side trying to find dried pieces. We were far enough into the woods that we could see the boat and the lights. As we were digging around, we heard this sharp, horrifying and echoing scream. We ran to the tree line to find Shannon, who was on the boat and yelling for us, crying and obviously panicked. We climbed down the side slowly. My brother stopped and stared out onto the lake. There's something floating in the water. I looked out and saw something slowly drifting along toward the shoreline. My brother walked toward the boat and told Shannon to come stand over by me. Then he walked to the edge of the lake and just stood there quietly. Shannon ran up to me and was crying. I started to walk over to my brother and he said, "I think it's a skinned animal. It doesn't have any skin." Just as he finishes that sentence, we hear something else. Stumbling footsteps through the shoreline. We turn and we can see a person, a man coming straight at us. Shannon screams again and backs up. My brother and I shoulder to shoulder so we can confront this guy together. He points to the thing in the water and starts clapping his hands together. He asked if we like his handiwork, to which we ask if he did that. He says of course, then says we need to help him fish it out. We tell him no thank you, please exit our day camping area, but it's like he didn't even hear us. He just kept wandering up and down the shore, admiring whatever was in the water. I stood behind him and I could see it. The water was dark, but I could see some detail. It was floating chest down, and there was this big black garbage bag covering the part of the back. It was too big to be a dog or anything. It didn't have a head, and I couldn't see if it had front legs or not. Whatever it was in fact skinned. It drifted slowly, turning as it moved with the current. We stood there for a few moments. didn't say anything, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Please don't let that be a person. Shannon suggested we pack up our chairs and get the hell out of there, so we did just that. Now that this whack job showed up, the only safe place was on the boat. We were literally just tossing our stuff up onto the deck, totally careless of the damage, so we clambered up after it and pushed off from the shore. Our new friend was too far away to stop us. He got to us by the time we had the engine going and backed off 20 feet. As we were backing out, I was driving the boat, so I didn't get really a good look, but my brother looked over the edge and tried to get a better description on it. There was blood and other stuff, leaving a pretty steady trail behind it. A cloud so dark, it could have passed for tar. Here's the craziest part. That guy dove in the water and started swimming after us. There's no confusing it. He was barreling right for the side of the boat. There was a small pole ladder in the back, as well as various ropes hanging from the sides, so he could climb up if he got close enough. I really started trying to make some space between us, which deterred the guy, who then chose to swim over to the floating partial corpse. Shannon covered her eyes, was freaking out. We headed back to the dock at Spanish Flat. As we tore off for the other side of the lake, my brother looked back and shouted for us to look too. There was this little dinghy piece of shit coming at us from a little further up the channel. It was small, maybe a 4-person craft, and the guy driving it looked a lot like the guy that we saw on shore. Mangy, disheveled, just weird in general. He brought his little boat around to where the other guy was, and then after that, we lost line of sight. All the more reason to get the hell out of there. Slowly, one breath at a time, we gathered ourselves to make our report. There was an office there for the park department or something, but nobody was there. We waited for quite a while until a lot attendant showed up, but wasn't really a park ranger. We told him that we had a very serious report to make, left our name and number with him. By this time it was getting dark and we really just wanted to leave. We drove to the closest gas station, left a note and number for the clerk to give to any rangers that stopped in. We got a call the next morning and all went in to file the paperwork. It was a quiet ride home. The rangers were completely blown away by what we told them. They said a few others had called in a boat with the exact same description, but they were nowhere to be found. My brother hasn't brought it up in years, but the last time he did, he said he didn't want to make for a guess about what it was. He got a better look than me, but we didn't go back to that lake for another decade or so after. It still upsets me to think about it today.
I'm studying in a different state from where I live. This state is highly crime-ridden, with many going unreported and corruption being really high. As you go into the interiors and more rural areas, there is very limited regard for the written law, and it is the law of the land that prevails. Unfortunately, due to the need for land, most of the universities are built in rural areas in the middle of nowhere. My university was no exception. With that background information out of the way, here's my story. I had just gotten done with my end semester exams, and me and my friends had gone out to the city side to celebrate. Unfortunately, we had lost track of time, and we had started to return the journey to campus only at 9:30 p.m., and it was a good 2-hour drive. Definitely unsafe to travel at night here. As we're going back via a highway, we hit traffic. So the driver of the cab we took said he would take a shortcut, and we took a turn that went via a desolate road passing a village adjacent to the one my university was in. Horrible decision. Us and another car, where that driver probably had a similar idea of a shortcut, made this same turn and went down this road. It was all dark, and apart from a few close shops and huts, it was all wilderness. Suddenly our cab and the other car were stopped by around 10 or more locals who blocked both cars. A few of them came up to us and they had asked us to pay a toll for that road. This wasn't a rare occurrence. Tolls like this are often charged on such roads. Especially at night, these toll takers become active. These are not official government tolls, but they're charged by locals because they know they have the power. They're illegal, all right, It's just an understood custom that such tolls will be paid. These people who stopped us were very clearly drunk and angry. My driver started pleading with them not to take the toll, but they were in no mood to listen. Having been here for 2 years and interacting with the workers at the university, I could understand the dialect of this region well enough. At one point, the driver's pleas actually made these people angry, and one of them started shouting. At one point, in a fit of rage, he said something to the effect of, "If you do not follow the rules, you're not getting out alive." And that's when I saw it. 5 men were near our car, and the person who was talking had a gun, and 2 others had really long knives. All of us knew then that paying the toll wasn't optional anymore, and we all pulled cash from our wallets and then paid the fee, and then got ready to leave. Seeing that gun itself was scary enough, but the truly scary part came a few seconds later. Remember the other car that I talked about? Remember the other car I talked about that was also stopped? Half of the group had come to get the toll from us, while the other half went to the other dude. That car just had one driver. A similar argument must have gone down there. Unfortunately, it seemed like the other dude hadn't complied, and given how drunk the locals were, they were angry and had had enough. They dragged the man out of his car and then started lynching him right there, pelting him with sticks and stones. And then the people near us who had knives then joined in and started taking their turns to stab him. The gun was the only weapon that wasn't used when we were there, as we heard no shots. The man was getting lynched right in front of us, and we were powerless to do anything. Staying there would likely mean that we would suffer the same fate. It felt like we were watching this horrific sight for hours, though in reality, it was only 20 to 30 seconds. Our driver realized what was happening and gunned it out of there. We called the police immediately, but there wasn't a police station anywhere near that village. Our driver then told us what we already knew, that the police would be too late. On top of that, the police, being locals themselves, often have an understanding with such groups of people, and usually just look the other way. We managed to reach university, thoroughly shaken up, and I'd nearly pissed myself. We informed our authorities at the university, and they said that they would pursue matters further, but we never heard anything. We're all still figuring out how to live with having witnessed what was most likely a murder. I don't mean to offend anyone here, but such crimes are not uncommon. While India is a beautiful place, with rich culture and heritage, but like any other country, it has its dark side. And seeing it firsthand, even if it was only for 30 seconds, well, it has scarred me for life.
When I was in my early 20s, I was living in Chicago, and I wasn't making that much money. When I found this apartment, it was too good to be true. The top floor was a duplex with 6 rooms for $775. The agent who showed me this apartment stressed to me that the landlords were very religious. I didn't have an issue with that, even if it did sound a bit ominous. The landlords were an elderly couple that lived downstairs. At first, they seemed okay. When I would see them in the yard, they would smile at me. But when they saw that I was having my boyfriend over, things started to get really strange. One day I was in my office writing, and I hear a knock at the door. I open up, and it's the old lady from downstairs. Before I could even say hello, she asked me if I ever got an abortion. I shut the door in her face. No thanks. This was a colossal mistake. The layout of the house was a bit odd. There was a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs. It was always locked. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way that it led directly into my landlord's living room. One day I was in my kitchen, cooking. My boyfriend was at work, and I was by myself, when I heard what sounded like the click of a door. Okay. I walked into the hallway and looked around. I didn't see anyone. I poked my head into all the rooms. Nobody was there. I then looked down the staircase, and there was the neighbor lady, standing there, staring back at me. I screamed. She flinched and stepped back into her apartment, swinging the door shut. After that incident, I spent every possible moment away from the house I could. I would come back and discover that something had been moved. A window would be shut, once the shower was dripping and my towel was damp. I couldn't lock that downstairs door. Since it was technically a door to their house, they were the only ones with the key. The knocking became frequent, 3 or 4 times a day. My boyfriend and I propped up an old mattress so we wouldn't have to hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work and the stairs were gone. I physically could not leave my house. They had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they did not answer. Finally, their son came out of the house and explained that they were doing some remodeling. He told me that I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. So I descended the staircase, opened the door, and they were both sitting at their filthy kitchen table, staring at me. The phone was ringing in its cradle. They must have heard it, but they kept staring at me with this blank look on their faces. I crossed their kitchen and left out the back door. A few days later, I came home from my job and noticed the bathroom floor was almost completely flooded, like somebody had left the faucet on. The old woman, seeing that I had come home, came up the stairs and knocked, screaming at me that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son would have to come and fix it. I was so exhausted at this point that I just said it was okay. Her son comes by a few hours later. I open the door and tell him that I needed an hour or so. He then picks something up and swings it at me. It was a massive wrench. I somehow ducked out of the way before he stumbles over. I then pushed past him and booked it down the newly repaired stairs as quickly as I could and called the police. They come by and take down the complaint, but since there was no physical contact, they couldn't do anything. I later discovered that this old couple had a daughter on the force. In the middle of the night, myself, my boyfriend, and several of his friends packed up all of our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels and out of our vehicles for a month, until we found a new place. That old couple never attempted to contact us again. This past New Year was my 4th year anniversary with my boyfriend. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. You had to drive down a small private road that ended in a roundabout. Off this roundabout was a long uphill driveway that led to our cabin. When we got to the cabin, it was snowy and scenic. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you had to enter through some stairs in the back. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the information outlined. The book stated that during the winter season, to not be surprised if their contracted snowplower showed up to clear off the driveway. Alright, sounds good to me. We unpacked and realized that there was no cell service, but there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed it to be. We planned to spend the next day in town. I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed for dinner. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of white. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. It was at that point my boyfriend stopped the car and asked me if I had noticed the new tire tracks on the ground. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard these new tire tracks, but there they were. We remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by, but the issue was that we saw these tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark? We also knew that once we were at the cabin, there would be no cell service. So we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts and ask if they or one of their friends had stopped by the cabin. We waited for a while in town for a reply, but we never heard back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 o'clock, and we didn't want to be discourteous. We figured that we had blown the whole thing out of proportion, and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I was big into true crime and horror movies, and was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time we actually drove up the driveway, towards the top of the hill. That's when I noticed something. My stomach dropped when I saw the footprints in the snow. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, then got out of their car and walked onto the property. This property was quite large, with tons of trees and bushes, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw them, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry. We would just have an officer go onto the property with us, just to check everything out. We drove back down the driveway until we got service again. We then called the police, explained to them the situation, and waited for their arrival. A police officer showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined that there was no one there. Obviously, we were a bit shaken up and kind of embarrassed. We thanked him as he left. Needless to say, we no longer wanted to get into the hot tub and look out into the dark forest. Instead, we locked ourselves inside and watched a movie, with no champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with all the lights and TV on. As my boyfriend went to go brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It only lasted a few seconds. We both looked at each other and froze. It was the garage door. There are only very few reasons that someone would need to open a garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 o'clock in the morning. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here, and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. As I sat on the phone talking to the operator, we heard a bang on the balcony, as if someone threw something up onto it, when the operator told me the police were on their way. We sat crouched in the cabin, hoping the police would show up in time. Suddenly we saw the police lights in the driveway. They exited their cars and began searching the property. Soon we heard them knocking at the door. There were 2 policemen, the one in front of us, and the other a bit behind, still looking around the yard. I immediately noticed that the officer in the back was the one who came out on the first call. They told us that not only was the garage door shut, it was locked. Again, there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said that the road conditions were too dangerous at that time. I looked at the officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I deeply disappointed him. We went back inside, again, locking all the doors, and then went to bed. The next day we were leaving. We didn't feel right in the cabin anymore, and I just wanted to get out of there. As we packed, we heard the same noise. It was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage door opening. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I think back on this story and I'm embarrassed, but I'm also incredibly grateful for some reason. We were wrong about the garage door opening, and maybe I was being a bit too paranoid. But the tire tracks and footprints we saw were there. For all we know, there could have been somebody out there, watching us.
Before I officially started up my business, I used to work as like a general handyman, and on a very casual basis too. I was fresh out of the county and determined to turn myself around, but I barely had 2 cents to my name, so I just started hustling with whatever I could get my hands on. And about 6 months after, I had my own van, my own tools, and I had everything except a contractor's license. But that sure as hell didn't stop me from building my business and growing my revenue. And about a year later, I was basically working on retainer for a landlord who operated multiple different properties across the city. Some were in nice areas, some were in not so nice areas, and I wasn't actually on retainer. We just joked that he gave me so much work that I might as well have been. Anyway, one day he asked me if I could fit some veneers on some old cabinets, so I tell him sure, get the address of the place that he wants me to visit, then headed over the very next morning to get it done. The tenant of the apartment I was working on had been asked to vacate while the work was going on, so I was free to do my thing, which for the most part consisted of applying a super strong adhesive to the cabinets before carefully fitting the veneers. I was about halfway through the job when I heard the key turning in the lock of the apartment's door. I waited until the tenant was within earshot, then called out an apology for the smell of the glue, which by that stage was still real strong and thick in the air. A second or so later, a woman of maybe 35 to 40 appeared in the doorway, and she looked at me with these big, wild eyes before asking me, "Where is it?" I was still halfway up a ladder at the time, so I'm halfway turned around on it when I ask her back, "Where's what?" Instead of answering me, she got really angry all of a sudden, stomped her way to the center of the room and told me word for word, "Tell me, or I'll kick you off that thing ladder." I start feeling incredibly vulnerable after that, so I start climbing down real fast in the hopes that she was only bluffing, or if she does kick the ladder, then I'll have less of a fall and less chance to really hurt myself. I expected some kind of confrontation when I got to the ground, so I can feel my adrenaline start kicking in as I stepped off that bottom rung and turned to face her. But by the time I did, she was gone. Gone in the sense that she was no longer in front of me, and gone in the sense that whoever I had just been talking to was gone too. She dropped to her knees, grabbed the open tube of adhesive that I'd been using, and started to sniff up these deep huffs of the fumes into her nose. I must have asked her something like, "What the hell, lady?" and then reached down to take her by the shoulder to try to pull her away from it. But the second I touched her, she turned and there was a totally different person looking back at me. The lady that walked into her apartment had been rude and confrontational, but the lady staring back at me now looked like she could have ripped out my liver, eaten it raw, and then asked for seconds. She screamed, "Get your hands off of me," shoved me, then went right back to huffing the tube of industrial-strength adhesive that I had sitting at the bottom of the ladder. And I'm serious when I say it was like a transformation. Her eyes were different, still angry but full of something else too. She was like a mountain lion if a person got too close to her cubs, completely rabid, and even though she was small enough for me to toss, I got to admit that in that moment, I was goddamn terrified. She kept on huffing and puffing on that tube of glue until all that rage just seemed to wash away from her. Then once she was done, and with the tube of glue still in her hand, she got up, walked over to her couch, and just plopped herself down and lay there looking all blissed out like she didn't even know where she was. I remember telling her that I was going to get my stuff and put it in the van and get the hell out of there, and that she'd have to deal with her landlord if she wanted the rest of the cabinet veneers fitted. She just groaned at me and waved her arm as if to say, "Just go away already." And so I did. With her lying there like a zombie, I packed up my stuff and got the hell out of there before she decided that she wanted to help herself to the rest of my gear. I left her with that tube of adhesive too. That stuff can be expensive, but there was no way that I was about to risk getting my face ripped off by trying to pull it out of her hand. So I pack up my gear, trying to carry as much as possible out to the van just in case the glue-sniffing tenant decided to steal something. I managed to get everything except my ladder under my arms, then on the way out, I started hearing this kid crying. There's no telling how long they'd been wailing, but I guess I just filtered it out into background noise while I was trying to keep from getting shredded by that crazy glue sniffer lady. But then when I step outside, I see where the crying was coming from. There was a car right there on the curb with both the driver's side and rear passenger door open. In the back, there was a kid still strapped into the car seat, and it was screaming out, "Mommy, Mommy," over and over again. There were grocery bags sat in the pathway to the apartment too, like the woman had gotten home, saw the van and rushed inside after abandoning both her grocery bags and her kid. Maybe she just forgot that I was stopping by that day and rushed inside to check it out before bringing her kid and groceries inside. I'm not sure. But either way, she walked in, the smell of the adhesives hit her, and then that's all that she had in her mind. And that was the scariest thing of all. Way scarier than the prospect of getting my face chewed off by this crazy lady. This woman was such a degenerate drug addict that one little whiff of industrial strength adhesive and she was gone. Hell, she might have been Mother of the Year before she walked into that room, and then just boom, she was just right back to the bottom of the barrel, getting high all over again. I don't honestly know what her situation was, and I shouldn't speculate. I just hope her kid ended up okay, because with a mother like that, life sure is gonna be an uphill struggle.
This story happened in October of 2016. For context, I lived in Fargo. I am a 30-year-old male, but back then I was 22 and was still living with my parents and two brothers, Tommy and Andrew. One weekend, my brothers and I decided to go on a getaway that was 2 hours away from Fargo. We wanted to get out of the city and away from our nagging parents, so we decided to book a spacious Airbnb for a decent price that was located in a forest. We packed our backpacks, got in my truck, and headed over. When we got there, the host greeted us and left us the keys. The weather was perfect, and the view of the yellow autumn leaves on all the trees was stunning. On the first night, we decided to take a nice long walk in the forest. While hiking through the trees, we made small talk and generally explored the area. Soon, it became dark. I don't know about Tom and Andrew, but I'm easily creeped out by the dark alone. But being in a forest, no way. Guys, maybe we should head back to the rental, yeah? It's getting creepy out here. Then suddenly, a loud growl came from somewhere nearby. It sounded human, yet animalistic at the same time. What the was that? I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out. We then heard something speeding toward us. I hear something heading toward us. Let's get out of here quick. When I looked behind us, I saw a figure of what looked like a man coming out of the tree line. But here's the thing. It seemed way too tall. The shoulders were weirdly shaped. They were almost like arches. We got back to our Airbnb and locked the door, but it wasn't over yet. At around 1 a.m., we had calmed down enough to call it a night. But I was still paranoid. I couldn't get the image of the figure I saw out of my mind. Was it a man? If so, was he wearing some kind of costume? Could he be a part of a cult? Could there be others hiding out in the forest? Did our Airbnb host set us up? I got up and double-checked the house to make sure all the windows and doors were locked. I eventually went to bed, but I had trouble falling asleep. Out of random curiosity, I looked out my bedroom window, and I noticed a black dog under the dim driveway lamp. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but the more I looked at it, the more creeped out I got. The dog appeared to be looking right at me, not moving a muscle. What happened next was simply unbelievable. Its eyes began to glow red, and then it stood on its hind legs. Its stance became kangaroo-like before it took on a humanoid appearance with long, sharp fingernails. I freaked out and quickly closed the blinds. My brothers heard me screaming. "Josh, what's wrong with you?" "I saw something in the driveway. At first it was a dog, and then it became, I don't know, something else." They didn't believe me at first, but they quickly changed their minds when they heard that same deep growl we heard out in the forest. But this time, it was coming from just outside the front door. Something then began to strike the door over and over again. All three of us were freaking out and trying to look for a weapon in case that thing managed to break in. Thankfully, the door was solid wood. Eventually, all fell silent. My brothers and I stayed up for the rest of the night. The next morning, we got back in my truck and got the hell out of there. On the way out, I saw that same strange dog, its eyes following my truck as we tore off down the road. Our Airbnb host obviously didn't believe a word of what we said and never gave us a refund. But ultimately, I'm just glad we made it out of there alive.
I'm a female and have an Instagram account like many other people. I post pictures on my page here and there, and I always enjoy seeing how many likes and comments that my pictures get. Most of the comments and likes are from my good friends, but of course, not all of them are. Like many other people, I've experienced several creeps online. Sometimes random men will like my pictures, comment on them, or even send me direct messages. They can get kind of creepy, and sometimes I even delete them. For the most part though, I don't really care. It happens here and there and doesn't bother me. I remember though, one time, about a year ago, I posted a picture on Instagram and some guy liked it and commented on it. I read the comment, but didn't bother to click on his profile or anything. I did not know him, but he commented something like, "very nice," with a fire emoji. But not long after this, he sent me a direct message as well. He simply said hi to me, but I had no interest in responding. I did click on his page though to see who he was. He looked much older than me, and only had a few pictures. I had no idea who he was, and we didn't have any mutual followers, so I ignored him. I've gotten many direct messages from people who I don't know, and most of the time, I don't respond to them. They usually get the idea and leave me alone after I don't reply. I figured this would be no different, but the man sent me another direct message the next day. This one I also ignored. I didn't even open it. Over the next few days, he sent several more messages to me. I didn't bother to read any of them, and I figured eventually the man would give up, but he didn't. Over the next week or so, he sent me messages basically every single day. I would get Instagram notifications several times a day, and at least one of them would be from the man sending me another message. Eventually, I got tired of it and decided to finally block the guy. But before I did, I wanted to read through the messages that he sent me. Right away, I saw that he had sent a photo, and it was my house. I realized that this was no ordinary creep. This man must live in the area, and he somehow knew where I lived. I looked at the other messages that he sent me. He said hi to me over and over again, and then blatantly told me that he knew where I lived. That was followed by a picture of my house, and then him saying hi to me again. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I reported his account to Instagram and then blocked him. However, I wasn't really confident that anything would be done. I didn't think this was worth going to the police either, because I didn't think that the man had broken any laws. Still, I was now very worried. What was this man capable of? I found myself looking out my front window almost constantly for the rest of the day. I lived by myself in a 2-story home near a major US city. For the rest of that day, I did not have to go anywhere, and I did my best to stop worrying. I called several of my friends and spoke with them about it. Unfortunately, none of them could come over and keep me company that night because they were either working or had prior plans. I started to feel better when nothing strange happened for a few hours. But then, nighttime came. At around 10 p.m., I was in my living room watching a movie on my TV. By now, my windows were covered with the shades, and I wasn't thinking about the guy as much. My phone hadn't received any strange Instagram notifications either. Part of me had been worried that the man would make another Instagram account and message me again, but that didn't happen. At one point during the movie, I randomly remembered and had the thought to check out the window again. It had been several hours since I had last checked. I turned behind me on the couch and carefully lifted the blinds back. That's when I saw a car parked right out front on the street that I did not recognize. Could that be him? With it being dark out and stuff, obviously I couldn't tell who was driving, but I could tell that there was a person in the driver's seat. I I quickly covered the window back up and wondered if the person had seen me. I sat there on the couch for a few moments, thinking of what I should do. Then I heard a car door open and shut. The person was getting out. I carefully moved the window shades again, just barely, just enough to see out. I saw a man walking towards the house through my front yard. This was definitely him. He walked up closer to the house, and I heard him moving just outside of my window. I couldn't believe that this was happening. I really hoped that he would not try to break in. I heard him walking further down to behind the house. This time, I was calling the police for sure. I took out my phone and dialed. I stayed where I was on the couch and spoke with the police as I waited for them to arrive. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything indicating where the man was. Several minutes later, though, I heard a car door open and shut again outside. I was hoping that it was the police arriving, and I looked outside, but instead, I saw it was the man driving away. I was so glad that he was gone, but I also knew that the police would not be able to catch him right away now. They arrived about 5 minutes later. I told them about the man leaving, and gave the best description of him and the car that I could, but I didn't get a very good look at either. I still didn't feel that confident about him being located. I gave the police the whole story, but I had blocked the account, and when I looked at accounts that I had blocked, it must have been deleted because it was gone. After the police left, I was still very worried. I decided that I would stay at one of my friends' houses for the next few days. This was a big help to me because I knew that the man still knew where I lived and he might return. The very next night, I got a direct message request from a random Instagram account. The username was user and then a bunch of random numbers, and it had no profile picture. They sent me just a photograph, and it was of my bedroom window. It was taken from my yard. That must have been what he was doing. I showed the picture to my friend, and we went to the police with it, but I don't know that there was much they could do. The account had no pictures or any information on it. They did say that they would investigate, though. Several days went by without anything happening. I decided that I would return to my house. I drove back there in the morning, but when I got there, I noticed that it had been broken into. The window to the back door had been smashed. I called the police immediately and ran back outside to my car in fear that the man was still inside my house. They arrived very quickly and entered my house. They were inside for a while, but soon they came out with the man. He had been hiding inside of my house. I guess he had broken in the previous night and was waiting for me to return. I'm so glad that he was caught, and I will never forget that experience. I'm a typical guy, and I have the Instagram app. I go on it basically every day to check out what my friends are doing and follow my favorite sports teams and things like that. One thing that I do a lot is go on the Explore page. This is just a bunch of random posts from accounts you don't follow, but that might interest you. It's interesting to look at them sometimes, and every new time you log into Instagram though, it's completely different. Now, I don't remember exactly when this started, but I know that I saw the same picture on the Explore page twice. This isn't a big deal, but then I saw it a third time. I thought this was pretty strange, but I still didn't click on it. A couple of times later though, I saw it yet again. I truly don't know how many times I saw the picture, but it just kept showing up. Eventually, I caved and I clicked on it, wondering why I kept seeing it. This photo was a picture of a car. It was seemingly random. The car was not particularly new or old, it just looked average. It was a gray 4-door sedan. The picture did not have the number of likes listed and didn't have any comments either. I clicked on the page, and it was a random word with numbers, and the profile picture was one of the cars. The page only had like 5 followers. On the page were 4 photos, and they were all of different cars. It was like somebody had just walked down the street and took pictures of random parked cars, but none of the cars were really that unique. 2 were on the side of the street parked, and 1 was in the driveway, and another was in a parking lot. I noticed that one of the cars in the photos was the same make and model that I had. Then I examined the photo a little bit closer. I soon realized that that was my car. I could tell that it was parked in my driveway. This gave me the chills when I saw it. Who ran this account? I shared the picture with a couple of my friends. None of the pictures had any captions or comments on them. My friends agreed that it was really weird, but didn't know who would do that or why. I was really curious, and I thought about commenting or sending a message to the page, but I decided not to. The very next day, I went on Instagram again. This time, I saw the same picture of my car on the Explore page. I clicked on it wondering if it was new, but it was in fact the same one. Then I clicked on the profile again because I saw that they had posted a story. The story was a poll. The poll said, "Which one?" Then there were the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. I did not vote because I didn't understand it at all at the time. I thought this was just really weird and decided to leave it alone. I got off of Instagram, and for the rest of the day, I didn't go anywhere. My car sat there in the driveway where it always did. I went to bed that night and got up the next morning to go to work. When I headed out for my car, it was gone. I couldn't believe it. I remembered the posts and everything. I called the police and then my boss. Luckily, my boss didn't mind, and she said I could come in a little bit late after I took care of the police report and everything. They took down all of the information that I could give them, including about the strange Instagram page. Unfortunately, when I looked, it had been deleted. The police assured me that they would do what they could to find my vehicle. I took a lift to work and back, and was able to get a rental car later that day through insurance. For the next few days, I was thinking about it all the time, until finally, I got a call that the police had located my vehicle. It was found abandoned, parked on the side of the road, about 20 miles away. Luckily, it had no damage. I was able to get it back, but I don't think the police ever found out who did it. That Instagram page was really bizarre though. Was the poll a way of deciding which car the person was going to steal? And why would they post these things on Instagram anyways? Either way, I hope nothing like this happens again.
My name is Emily, and this happened to me in the spring of 2022. I was living by myself at the time in an apartment, and I worked in the city. I have an Instagram page that has a few thousand followers. I'm not famous by any means, and I'm certainly not an Instagram model, but I do post there pretty frequently. One night, I got a text message from one of my friends. It was a link to an Instagram page, and my friend said, "This isn't you, is it?" I clicked on the profile, and it was an Instagram account claiming to be me, except it wasn't using my name, but a different name, and they had posted quite a few pictures that were all mine. I think the account had about 100 posts, and this had been going on for several months. Most of the pictures were pictures that I had already posted on Instagram. They had a decent amount of followers too. I think the account had about 500. I couldn't believe it. Whoever was running this account was just screenshotting my pictures and posting them to their account, and they were getting over 100 likes, and nobody seemed to realize that the entire page was a fraud. I looked at some of the comments, and they were just saying things like, "Wow, you're beautiful." As I scrolled through and looked at more pictures though, I noticed something strange. Some of the pictures of me that they posted were not from my Instagram page. They were pictures that I had of myself, but had never posted. These photos were on my phone, and I don't know how the person had them. The pictures weren't bad or anything, but I just had no clue how they got a hold of them. I sent a direct message to the page, asking who they were and why they were stealing my identity. Then I reported the page. Not long after I had sent the message to the page though, they blocked me. I told a few of my friends about it, and they said that they would report the page as well. Within a couple of days, the page ended up getting shut down. I was glad that it was now gone, but I still wondered who had done it. Well, a few days after the page was taken down, I left my apartment one morning. There was a note on my front door. It was folded on a piece of paper and taped to my front door, and when I looked at it, I realized that it was from whoever had been running the Instagram page. The note talked about how this person could get any information from me that they wanted. They also rambled about how I thought I must be so cool because I was popular and some other stuff. When I got this, I went straight to the police. Whoever this was knew where I lived and seemed to be able to hack into some of my accounts. After telling the police all the information that I could, I created new accounts for almost everything that I had and changed all of my passwords. Luckily for me, I moved out of that apartment just a few weeks later because my lease was up. Since that experience, nothing else strange has happened, but I still don't know who was doing that. My theory is that it could have possibly been an old high school classmate who didn't like me or something. Or it could have been somebody totally random. I really don't know. This is a crazy experience that I had several years ago now. I should mention that I'm a female, and I was at a park one day. This was a city park that I was walking through on the way back from work. It's a pretty large area within a large city, so there are usually a lot of people there. As I walked though, at some point, a guy started to follow me throughout the park. I noticed him when I stopped for a moment to look at something, and saw him just kind of standing around. Then, as I was walking away, he started walking behind me. Soon, I left the park and went onto a city sidewalk. when I was waiting to cross the street and saw him standing there around me. Each time that I looked near the guy, it appeared as though he was looking at me as well. To this point though, I didn't know for a fact that he was following me, but I just suspected it. I had to walk about 10 more minutes to get back to my apartment. I checked behind me every so often, and each time that I did, the man was still there following me. This was the first time that something like this had ever happened. When at last I reached my building, he was maybe 20 feet behind me. I quickly went inside and then used my key to enter the building. Then I closed the door behind me and the guy did not enter. I'm not sure if he tried to or if he just kept walking past when I went in. I remembered what he looked like, but I hoped that I would not see him again. Several hours later that night, I got a notification on my phone of a new Instagram follower. When I opened the app, I saw who the follower was. When I noticed his picture, it was the same guy who had been following me around. I had no idea how he knew my name or found my profile. After seeing this, I blocked him. I was really creeped out by how he found me. The very next night, when I was home in my apartment, I got another Instagram notification. The same guy had followed my second profile. I had a second Instagram account where I posted more random things, and it was only followed by my closest friends. The account was private, but he was requesting to follow me. And this account was so private that I didn't even use my name, and I didn't even follow myself with it. I was more freaked out than anything when I saw that he had found it. I blocked him on that profile as well. Only about 30 minutes after this, there was a knock at my door. I walked over and looked through the peephole. The same guy was there. Obviously, he knew where I lived. I didn't know how he knew which unit was mine, though. I wasn't going to open the door. He knocked again after about a minute or so. I kept watching him, but he didn't leave. He just kept standing there. I called the police and kept an eye out. The man was just standing there as if he was expecting me to open the door for him. Occasionally, he paced around a little, but he kept returning to right in front of my door. The police got there within about 10 minutes. When they arrived, the man was still there standing outside of my door. I remember that they talked to him, and I heard him claim that he must be at the wrong address. He claimed that he had no clue why anybody would call the cops, and he was trying to see his friend Jason. I think the police knew that he was lying. They basically just told him to leave me alone though, and not to come back to the apartment building. I talked with officers as well and told them what happened. They said that if he came back to call them again, and luckily he didn't. I never saw him again after that night. I still can't believe how much of a creep that guy was. This happened to me when I was in college. It was during my second year at my university. I lived in a small house which I shared with my roommate Thomas. The university I went to is rather large, and I think has about 20,000 total students. This took place sometime during the first semester. I remember that one day I went on Instagram and saw that I had a new follower. I clicked on the profile, and it was a girl named Rhonda. She had my school initials in her profile, as well as what I assumed would be her graduating year. She was also followed by 2 people that I knew from college. None of my really close friends, but some guys that I knew who they were and followed them. I realized that Rhonda must have went to my school, and I followed her back. On her profile, she didn't have too many pictures, a few selfies and some pictures of her dog. That was about it. After following her back, I went on with things and didn't think much of it. A few days went by. Then, one day, I noticed that Rhonda liked all of my pictures on Instagram. Now, I had about 40 posts or so, dating all the way back to my early years of high school. She liked every single photo, and I found that nice, but also a little bit random and odd. I thought that maybe she liked me or something. She didn't comment on anything or send me any messages though. Now, several more days went by after this. Then one night, Thomas was studying at a classroom and I was at home by myself. There was then a knock on the door. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night, and I wasn't expecting anybody and had no clue as to who it was. I had been in my room, so I didn't hear the knock very well. I got up and went out into the hallway, and then I heard another knock. But I realized then that the knocking was coming from the back door of the house.
Not even the front door. Now this was really strange. I walked over to the back door and looked out the window. When I did, I saw a girl standing there. It was Rhonda, but at first I didn't recognize her because I had only seen some selfies of her on Instagram. I don't think that I had ever seen her in person before. As I was standing by the door, she tried opening it up. Then I opened up the back door and said hi to her. I then asked her what she was doing here. She asked me if she could come inside. I had a bad feeling about it. Something about her was sort of creeping me out. Maybe it was the fact that she showed up unannounced to my back door at 9 o'clock at night. And by the way, she had no way of knowing where I lived. I asked her how she knew where my house was. She just asked to come inside again. I really didn't want her to. So instead, I told her that I was really busy with homework and I had to get back to it. She just stood there for a moment looking disappointed. Then she said that she was just going to go and walked off sort of angrily. I was glad that she was going, but more confused than anything. After she left, I went back inside and went into my room. Then I blocked Rhonda on Instagram. I felt that she had crossed the line by showing up unannounced like that. When Thomas got back home, I asked him if he knew Rhonda at all. He said no. I showed him her picture and he still didn't recognize her. I told him what happened and he was just as confused as I was. I was hoping that maybe he had known Rhonda and she asked him for the address or something. But the fact that he didn't made it that much more creepy and weird. The very next night, I was pulling a late night session of homework. I had some stuff due at 11:59 p.m. I was trying to get it done at the last moment. It was probably like 11:30 and I was almost done when I heard Thomas call me from the living room. He was in there watching TV and I asked him what he wanted. Then he told me that there was a girl standing at the front door. I knew who it was. I got up and walked out into the living room. I looked out the front door to see Rhonda just standing there, but she didn't knock on the door or anything. She appeared to look over and notice me. Then she turned and ran off. It was the creepiest thing ever. I went back and finished my homework and then joined Thomas watching TV in the living room. We kept glancing out the windows to see if she would come back, but luckily she didn't. After that, I never saw her again. I remember I asked Thomas to look her up on Instagram months later in the school year. She had a few more pictures then and appeared to still attend our university. I still don't know what she was doing. It was really creepy behavior though. This happened 2 years ago now. I'm a female and live alone in an apartment building. Like many people, I have an Instagram page that I post on pretty regularly. I would say I post on average at least once a month. I enjoy posting pictures on Instagram, but I know that occasionally you have to deal with a bot or a creepy person. For the most part, I hadn't had any bad experiences until this happened. One day I opened the Instagram app and saw that I had a direct message. It was from one of my followers, a guy named Tim. I didn't know him and I didn't follow him either. I'm not sure how long he had been following me for, but he sent me a message asking if I could come and hang out with him. I found this to be kind of weird and did not respond. I mean, he didn't even have a conversation with me and I didn't know him. He couldn't possibly expect me to just say yes. And based on his profile picture, I wasn't interested in him. I figured that he wouldn't message me again after that. But the next day, he sent me another message. He once more asked me to hang out with him and said that he could pick me up. This time I responded and said, "No thanks, I appreciate the offer though." Now he had to understand that I wasn't interested. Tim then tried to convince me, but I ignored him. I didn't really know why he was sending me these messages seemingly out of nowhere. The next day, I didn't get any more messages from him. I figured that he would stop communicating with me at that point. The following night, I went grocery shopping after work. I would go shopping occasionally here and there whenever I needed to. I didn't have a particular routine or anything. I was inside of the store shopping for about 20 minutes. The time was probably about 8 p.m. or so. After I was done shopping, I headed out to my car in the parking lot. By now, it was mostly quiet, but there were a few people here and there. I got all the way to my vehicle, only to see that there was a car parked next to me. I started to take my groceries out of the cart and put them in my car.
That's when the door opened to the car next to me and a guy got out. I did not recognize him. He just seemed like another guy going shopping, but he didn't walk to the store and instead headed straight for me. At first, I was confused, but he then said my name and asked me why I thought I could ignore him. I realized that it was Tim from Instagram, and I did recognize him from his picture at that point. I was too confused to say anything though. He said that he was here now, and we were together, so we may as well hang out. I finally spoke and asked him what he was doing and how he knew I would be here. He claimed that it was a coincidence. I finished putting my groceries in my car and said that I had to get home. I closed my trunk and then tried to walk around him to my driver's door, but he stopped me by grabbing my arm. He told me to come on and go with him. I asked him to let me go and said that he was hurting my arm, but he started to pull me away towards his car. He was a lot stronger than I was, and we started moving towards his vehicle. Then I started yelling as loud as I could. I was yelling help and telling him to let me go. There were luckily a few people that were walking to their cars in the parking lot a ways away. They took notice of what was going on though, and when Tim saw this, he let me go and told me to shut up. I instantly ran around my car for the driver's door and got inside. Tim followed me, but I locked the door before he could get in. I didn't waste any time, and I drove out of there. Tim had to run back to his car, and I left the parking lot extremely fast. By the time he started his car, I had already left. I went around another nearby store that was out of his sight. Then I took some random residential roads until I was sure he wasn't following me. After that, I drove home. I was so focused on not letting him follow me that I forgot to call the police for a while, but eventually I did. I told them everything that happened, but when I got to my Instagram page, his account was gone. I think he deleted it. Still, after that night, I never saw Tim or heard from him again.